Mr. Chairman, the issue that I want to raise, and I know that Mr. Cutler is familiar with this issue. I don't believe we've talked about it today, and by no means am I making any derogatory statements about anybody on this committee. But what concerns me very, very much is there are individuals who on nationwide radio and television have disseminated unfounded accusations that I think nobody on this committee believes, and I'm not suggesting that anyone does, but unfounded accusations that have gone so far as to even suggest that the President of the United States and Mrs. Clinton are involved in murder, are involved in thuggery, and in arson. And these are not just little people who are talking, some little splinter group. These are people who are on national radio, national television, making these statements. And I am very concerned about these types of vicious political attacks. Now, to my mind, what goes on there is not simply an effort to undermine the presidency of Bill Clinton. That's what politics is about, and that's the game we play. But what those people are doing, Mr. Chairman, are really undermining the faith of the American people in the democratic process. I disagree. I'm an independent. I disagree with Mr. Clinton all the time. So do the Republicans. So do all of us. But if you have people speaking to millions of Americans who are saying that the President of the United States and Mrs. Clinton are involved in murder, are involved in arson, are involved in thuggery, and that's what millions of people are hearing, what are those people to believe about the United States government? Why should they participate in the political process? Why should they vote? This concerns me very much. So my questions to you, Mr. Cutler, are basically twofold. Number one, tell us, in your judgment, the worst example of what you refer to as poor judgment. There's been a lot of poor judgment. What is the worst? And second of all, if you can say a word as to how the White House or how you are responding or feel about these outrageous allegations, which, again, I want to repeat, I believe nobody in this committee believes. Those are my two questions.
Well, with respect to poor judgment, Mr. Sanders, as I've said before, second-guessing after the event is always very easy. I wasn't there at the time, and I'm sure the people who were there acted in complete good faith. But I think myself that the question of whether Mr. Altman should recuse himself was a question he should have decided without consulting the White House, and that it was too bad that the White House people involved indicated to him they rather hoped he wouldn't. They had a preference that he wouldn't. They may have had perfectly good reasons for that. My own view is that once the matter came up, it would have been better, and I believe what I would have done at the time is say, go ahead and recuse, that given the political and factual circumstances of Whitewater at the time, it would have been better to recuse, and we might not be here in this hearing today. I might still be practicing law instead. With respect to these attacks on President and Mrs. Clinton, they have reached a level of invective and viciousness, if you'll let me say that, that is unparalleled, a new low. Level is probably the wrong word, a low. Unparalleled, at least in my experience in the government, that goes all the way back to World War II. I'm sure there have been other periods in American history when other presidents have been vilified and we've survived it. But this seems to be very well financed. It's a cottage industry. There are a great many people, apparently, who would like to bring President Clinton down, who will stop at practically nothing. I talked earlier about trust. I really deplore the lack of trust of one party for another, of the public for the president, of the press for anyone in public office today. I think we've reached a low that should make us ashamed of ourselves. It's one thing for the press and anyone exercising First Amendment rights to be able to say what he wants about an administration, and it's good for us. But I come back, as I said the other day, to Mr. Joseph Welch's statement when he was counsel for the Secretary of the Army dealing with Senator McCarthy, have you no decency? And I think it's something of which we should all remind ourselves.
The following are a few of the many casualties of those having knowledge or involvement in one or more of the Clinton scandals. In order to save time, only a partial list is shown. July 1978, Susan Coleman allegedly became pregnant after having an affair with Clinton, a problem which threatened to disrupt Clinton's election bid. She committed suicide by shooting herself in the back of the head. August 1991. Danny Casoloro was a reporter who investigated various scandals in Arkansas, including Clinton's Arkansas Development and Finance Authority and MENA. He had warned his family that his life was in danger, and if he were found dead of an apparent accident or suicide, not to believe it. Casoloro was found dead in a bathtub in a West Virginia hotel room with his wrist slit. His death was ruled a suicide. July 1992. C. Victor Racer II was a national finance co-chairman of Clinton's presidential campaign, who died in a plane crash near Anchorage, Alaska. With his inside knowledge of the Clinton administration, he allegedly had become disillusioned by what he had seen and thus became a potential liability. His son Montgomery also died in the same crash. Herschel Friday was a member of Victor Racer's campaign finance committee. Although he was a top-notch pilot, he died a year and a half later when his plane crashed and exploded as it approached the runway. His death was ruled an accident. September 1992, Paul Tully, Democratic National Committee political director, was a friend and trusted advisor of Clinton's. He was found dead due to unknown causes in his hotel room. December 1992, Paula Gober was a speech interpreter and had traveled with Clinton extensively from 1978 until her death. She died in a car accident. December 1992, Jim Wilhite was an associate of Mac McLarty's former firm. He had called McLarty just hours before dying in a skiing accident. January 1993, Ed Cawley, a former Clinton campaign finance chairman in Arkansas, was found dead in a hotel room. May 1993, John Wilson, a Washington, D.C. city councilman, had decided to come forward with inside knowledge he possessed regarding Whitewater. Wilson was found hanged. His death was ruled a suicide. June 1993, Paul Wiltshire, a Washington, D.C. attorney, wrote a 105-page letter to Attorney General Janet Reno describing evidence he had concerning drug and gun running out of Mena, Arkansas. On the first page of his letter, he stated, quote, "The lives of key participants, other witnesses, and even myself are now in grave danger as a result of my passing this information on to you. If you let this information fall into the hands of the wrong persons, some or all of those who know the truth could well be silenced in the very near future," unquote. Wiltshire was found dead in his apartment. The coroner did not rule on the cause of death. August 1993, John Walker was a senior investigator for the Resolution Trust Corporation. He was looking for information concerning a $50 million transfer from an RTC fund in Chicago to Madison Guaranty Savings and Loan to cover up a $47 million embezzlement scheme that included Whitewater and the Clintons. Walker mysteriously fell to his death from an apartment balcony. His death was ruled a suicide. September 1993. Dr. Stanley Hurd was a longtime friend and family physician of the Clintons and was chairman of Hillary's Health Reform Committee. He was killed in a plane crash only a few days after Stephen Dixon, the attorney for the Health Reform Committee, had been killed in the crash of his own light plane. March 1994, Dr. Donald Rogers, the Clintons' dentist, was traveling to meet London Sunday Telegraph reporter Ambrose Evans Pritchard with information on the Clinton scandals. Rogers and his pilot were killed when their twin-engine Cessna crashed in clear weather near Lawton, Oklahoma. Their deaths were ruled an accident. May 1994, Gandhi Baugh, Dan Lassiter's attorney, committed suicide by jumping out of the window of a tall building. His partner committed suicide 1 month later. June 1994, Stanley Huggins was a partner in a Memphis law firm who investigated the dealings of Madison Guaranty Savings and Loan. He produced a 300-page report that has never been made public. Huggins was found dead, reportedly of viral pneumonia. July 1994. Calvin Walraven was a 24-year-old police informant. He testified for the prosecution against Kevin Elders, son of Surgeon General Jocelyn Elders, which resulted in the conviction of Mr. Elders for drug trafficking. A few days later, after the trial, Mr. Walraven was found with a gunshot wound to the head. His death was ruled a suicide. October 1994. Florence Martin was an accountant who allegedly had documents as well as the PIN number to an account that had been set up in the name of Barry Seal for $1.46 million at the Fuji Bank in the Cayman Islands. Martin was found dead of 3 gunshot wounds to the head. November 1996. Barbara Wise was a Commerce Department staffer. She was found dead in her locked office at the Department of Commerce, partially nude and covered with bruises.
On August 3, 1994, Larry Nichols was arrested on false charges of writing 2 bad checks and failing to obey a yield sign 7 years earlier. The American media reported the arrest. When the Arkansas police admitted that the checks and traffic violations were fabricated, charges were dropped. Yet the media failed to report it. Nichols has suffered 3 attempts on his life since the release of the video. Federal agent Bill Duncan, a 15-year IRS veteran with a permit to carry a gun, was arrested for carrying a weapon, then handcuffed to a pipe in the basement of the Washington, D.C. police station, and later released. This incident effectively brought the MENA drug smuggling money laundering investigation to a halt. Duncan was later instructed by his superiors to lie to a federal grand jury regarding the results of his investigation. When he refused, he was forced to resign. Arkansas State Police investigator Russell Welsh nearly died after being poisoned with military-grade anthrax, a poison available only through the United States government. Arkansas State Police investigator Dr. Lauder, who successfully led the investigation against cocaine distributor Dan Lassiter, was forced to resign after attempting to reopen the cocaine trafficking investigation into Don Tyson. John Brown, Saline County homicide detective in charge of the Ives Henry murder investigation, was removed from the case after providing Congress with information linking the Clinton administration to drug trafficking in Mena, Arkansas. Brown was forbidden by his superiors to discuss Clinton's connection to the Ives Henry case, and after his refusal to do so, was forced to resign. In February 1994, veteran journalist L.J. Davis was beaten in his Little Rock hotel room. His attacker tore pages from his notebook which contained information about the inner workings of the Rose Law Firm and the Arkansas Development Finance Authority. In March 1985, Wayne Dumond was castrated and subsequently imprisoned for allegedly raping Bill Clinton's 17-year-old cousin. Even after evidence had proven that Dumond had been falsely accused and was completely innocent, Clinton blocked his release from prison. To date, every case which would link Bill Clinton with any criminal activities have been effectively shut down by various governmental agencies.
So I had a nice contract offer from the publisher, and I said, here's the condition. I said, if I find out that that plane went up and bad things happened, just an accident, I got to write that. I can't write some conspiracy book if it's not true. So they said, fine. They consented to that. So what I focused on was why the plane went up. And then I just uncovered this enormously corrupt enterprise in which, and what made this work, and I've done this in virtually every book I've written, is find someone on the inside, a truth teller on the inside who wants to tell their story. And that's why I work with the Sanders on the Flight 800 book, and I work with Yolanda Butler Hill on the Ron Brown book. She was Brown's confidant, lover, mistress, and business partner. Fantastic, interesting lady. Texan. She's white, by the way, and she's just really, I've really stayed in touch with her. She's getting very spiritual. She had some rough patches in her life, which she admits it, but she was deeply attached to Ron Brown. And not only was she attached to him emotionally, but she was attached to him business-wise, because she knew where all the bodies were buried. She knew everything that Ron Brown did. And so once his plane went down, then her life was at risk. Her life was at risk before the plane went down. She went into hiding for a couple years. They finally caught her. They prosecuted her on some bogus tax charge. Eric Holder, by the way, leading the way, and who was a Brown confidant. So that was my conditions for going into it. And then I just tell you, like the revealing moment. I also worked with another great truth teller on the book. They were my twin heroines of the book. The other one was Kathleen Janoski. She was a forensic photographer for the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. She was in the Navy also. And she was the one who discovered the hole in Ron Brown's head during the autopsy. There was no autopsy. When the bodies were coming back to Dover and she was photographed. And there were a couple of pathologists there. And as a result of her discovery of that hole, her career and the career of 3 pathologists were ruined because they went public with the information they had. There was no autopsy.
Did they do the x-ray of the head?
They did an x-ray of the head, and they had what they called the classic lead snowstorm. That is the bullet fragments in the head, and that was destroyed.
I have a copy.
Well, you may have the last. You don't have the hard copy because that's gone.
No.
You've seen the images, yeah, right. Anyhow, that was what intrigued me most. It's going to give you one intriguing detail. You really have to read the book because it's so much corruption. It was the 2 most corrupt years in American history, 95 and 96. Because after 94, when they had the House and the Senate, the Clintons led the most desperate ever campaign to retain the White House. And they were going to China for their money, and Indonesia for their money. And Ron Brown was the bad man, and he didn't like being in that role. But he was so corrupt, they had so much on him. The Clintons did, all they had to do was drop him, and he was toast. And Dan was right. He was facing the Inquisition within a week or two of the plane crash. He didn't want to go to Croatia. Here's the thing, the revealing thing. Sometimes the revealing thing is what isn't there. For instance, in TWA Flight 800, Bill Clinton writes a 900-page book. TWA Flight 800 was considered the #1 news story of 1996. It almost led to war. Several people have said to that, including Clinton himself when he was interviewed by Taylor Branch. And of his 900 pages, he dedicates 1 paragraph to the whole incident. Hillary Clinton, in her autobiography, 500-page book, she was in the White House that night, 1/3 of a sentence. Louis Freeh, the FBI director, not a word. George Tenet, assistant director of CIA at the time, became head of CIA, not a word. George Stephanopoulos, who claimed to be in the Situation Room that night, not a word. It just disappeared from public view. Dick Morris, who considered it one of the 3 acts of terror in the terror summer of 1996, not a word. I was on a radio show once with Dick Morris, and he was obviously a bigger name than I, so I was, trying to be polite. And there was he and I and the host, and I said, Dick, tell me what happened to TWA Flight 800. You knew, you were there. And then he talked over my answer like he didn't hear me. And then I repeated it again, and then he answered again as though my words had not filtered into the air at all. He just talked about something else 3 times. And I said, he's obviously not going to talk about this one. So sometimes it's what's not there. And with the Ron Brown crash, this was what really changed my opinion on the whole thing. Because for a long time, I wrote 2/3 of the book into a book thinking it was just an accident. Stuff happens. The real giveaway was the fact that the U.S. Air Force did a 22-volume report. And I went to request it. This is in 2003. And I was the first one to ask for it. The New York Times had a guy on the plane who was killed. The 35 people killed him in Dubrovnik, in Croatia. They didn't bother asking for the report. I'm thinking, how could this be? How could they not do this? So I emailed, it's Ramstein in Germany where it is. It's a paper. It's all on paper. There's no disc or anything. And I get a functionary, and she says, it's going to cost X thousands of dollars. It's going to take months. I got a deadline. I have a summary. I said, well, I guess I'll live without it because I just don't think I can find anything there. And so I said, sorry, it's a little rich for my blood. I got a deadline, blah, blah, blah. I get an email back from the colonel. It says, it'll be there in a week. We're waiving all fees. The Air Force obviously wanted the truth out. They had 6 people died and 16 cashiered as a result of this. And they weren't happy with the outcome. In fact, I got a call for the first time just 2 days ago from a retired Air Force colonel who knows a lot about this thing. And he told me, and this is a very credible guy. He said, what we did is, if plane crashes into a hillside, he said, we dropped a special ops guy in immediately afterwards because Clinton had to ascertain that Ron Brown was dead. And then when you get back into the book, you'll see how this all figures in. They didn't care. And then I shared the technical data with a couple TWA captains who had gotten to know through the 800 investigation, and let them have at it for a while. And they believe, they're firmly convinced the plane was sabotaged. there was this one, just curious detail, and I'll leave it here. I was working with a Croatian interpreter. What fascinated me about this is that Ron Brown was not, he died the day, on April 3rd, so they pushed it back to April 4th, so it was like, tied his death in with Martin Luther King's, blah, 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 Well, he wasn't going there for some, as they said, some mission for peace and justice, or whatever the Clintons said. He was going there to cut a deal between the neo-fascists who ran Croatia and a certain American corporation. It was much in the news in 2003. Enron, right? Enron guys took their own jet. And they landed at that airport. It was the worst storm in 10 years. Nonsense, it wasn't even raining. Just minutes before the Ron Brown plane did. And I'm into the Air Force report, and I come across this interview between the American ambassador to Croatia and an Air Force investigator. And he says, the ambassador says to her, very pretty innocently, he goes, the person you really need to talk to is Zdenka Gast, a woman named Zdenka Gast. And the Air Force guy says, why? He says, because she was the liaison between Enron and the Brown Party. And she was supposed to be on the Brown plane. And at the last minute, she got off and got on the Enron plane, right? So this makes it a little bit suspicious. It's kind of interesting. So I immediately tried to call Zdenka Gast, because she lives in the United States. And I got right to her office. I left a message. She's never going to call you back, but you got to try it. And the person said, I know she'll want to talk to you. No, she did not want to talk to you. She never called me back. But I'm going through the internet looking for stuff. And I find a photo of Zdenka Gast, and it's the Yugoslavian, or the Croatian equivalent of People magazine. And in the photo is Zdenka Gast, big buxom redhead, nice looking lady, middle-aged lady. And on her right arm, under her right arm is Alexis Herman, the Secretary of Labor, who arranged, and then White House liaison, who arranged the fatal trip for Ron Brown. And under her left arm, Hillary Clinton. Right? This is after the plane crash, right? The three amigas. And so I immediately sent it off to my interpreter. I said, I figured this must be some huge fundraising event in which Zdenka managed to pull these two together to get a picture taken. Turns out it was Alexis Herman's wedding reception inside the White House, hosted by the Clintons. There were about 30 people in attendance, and you've heard of the other 29. And there was Zdenka Gast in the midst of them. So you find these things, and conclusive. I cannot come to a fully conclusive verdict on what happened with Ron Brown, but the dispassionate observer, looking at the facts objectively, will come to the conclusion that he did not die by accident. And there's openings in that, but. And I've gotten so little help until just the other day this guy calls out of the blue. So you never know when it's going to happen. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that you think our military shot the plane down by mistake. Did they suspect it was another 9/11 type situation, or was it just a mistake, or what?
That's an awfully big question, and if I were to answer that now, I would take the rest of the hour. But I don't know the answer. Okay. Just to be honest with you, I don't know. Okay. Yes. Brandon?
Have anybody taken the job of tracking down every member of that crew and trying to interview them? Of the ship that the boat.
No, that's been. Those people are so off limits. None of them. And we know there are 3 subs involved.
But people have tried to interview them and they've been told they can't.
Yeah, I mean it's been and it's so verboten. It's astonishing. I heard just after the 800 investigation, the video came out this summer. For the first time, I heard from one of the guys on the subs. And he wasn't on the sub that night. He was on the sub a few days before, but he loaded, as he said, some experimental missiles on that he had never seen before. And then he said when he heard of the attack, of the thing, he was with his wife, and his wife said, "Do you think that was a terror attack?" And he said, "I hope to God it was, because if it wasn't, it was us." And now, I don't want to go into too much detail, because I don't know the answers. I really don't. And I'd like to know more, but up until then, I've tried to be agnostic on the subject, because I don't know for 100% confidence that it wasn't a terrorist attack. It's just that the evidence, as much as I'd like to think it was a terrorist attack, just for the sake of our own sense of confidence in our military, the evidence makes that very hard. Yes, ma'am.
I seem to remember, wasn't there a stewardess who survived the plane crash?
The Ron Brown plane crash, yes. Her name is Shelley Kelly. She was actually an Air Force officer, some warrant officer. She didn't survive long, and nor was she killed. She was in very, very bad shape when they took her off the plane, and they couldn't get rescue her because actually a major storm did hit that night, some hours after the crash, and they had to carry her down the hillside, the Croatian search and rescue or whatever. I mean, there was a lot of rumors about her walking off, getting good. That didn't happen. So. Then, just moving on a little bit, I'm just going to hit you some other major stuff that's true.